Hi, I'm Brian Israel. I'm the head of the environmental practice group at Arnold and Porter, and I'm also chair of the organization called Friends of Israel's Environment, which supports Adam Teva V'Din, and I'm very happy to be here with Evan Van Hook. Evan is a close personal friend, a client, and somebody I've known for many years. Evan is the Chief Sustainability Officer at Honeywell International, and I think Evan will talk a little bit about Honeywell in a minute. Evan has also recently been named one of the top 50 executives in the world for thought leadership on sustainability. So very happy to have you here today, Evan. And I thought maybe we'd get started if you could just give a little bit of background on your personal story, how you got here and how you became interested in sustainability and environmental issues. I think that will be interesting.
Sure. It's wonderful to be spending a Sunday with you, as we have done in the past. But yes, it's something that I personally have been passionate about for a long time, and I'll tell you sort of the frame of reference that I come at it from which I come at it. I am a lawyer by training, and the law school that I went to had a large environmental science school that was really affiliated with the law school. And I sort of went into law school assuming I was going to be working in the environmental area. But, this was back in the 19th century. And so, things were not quite the same as they are now. And but I knew that was what I wanted to focus on. And I did. I graduated from law school and ultimately became a partner at the Sidley Austin law firm, exclusively practicing in environmental law. And I do think that practice gives you, as you well know, obviously being the head of such an important group, it gives you a great perspective on a whole lot of areas, because essentially you're both helping clients solve issues, and those clients may be private companies, governments, anything. And you're also constantly sort of looking ahead to see, well, what are the issues we're going to have to address later. And so I think it's a great sort of entree into this. But then also at a certain point, I started teaching international environmental law at Columbia Law School and ended up teaching there for 10 years and left there to write a book on international environmental law with two of the other professors, the real professors, I call them. And so that whole experience gave me a lot of in-depth opportunity to plunge into the issues, but also to, I think, fairly deeply understand the underpinnings of governance in this area. And one of the sort of themes of the book is that, and I'm not here to push the book at all, but is that our international governance is sort of inherently feeble. And I won't waste a lot of time talking about that. But because of that, in my view, this very strong civil society regime has built up. And ultimately, how we address sustainability from a governance perspective is this pretty interesting combination of governmental and civil society norms. And I think that's probably going to continue for some time. So between the two of those, I was really starting to think a lot about these issues. And then a new governor came in New Jersey and asked me to come in and run what I call the dirty side of the agency, which was basically all of the hazardous materials, the cleanups, the brownfields, the dredging, the landfills, all of that stuff. But it gave me an opportunity to sort of, from a pure governmental perspective, see how these are managed. And then finally, in 2004, Honeywell asked me to come in, and they were at sort of an interesting point because, again, not to go down memory lane, but they had just had a very tumultuous potential merger and acquisition with GE that was ultimately denied by the EU. And so they were really trying to sort themselves out again in a really fundamental way, and asked me to come in. And the then CEO was very intent on staking out what we called sustainable opportunity as a key precept of the company. And since that time, I have been here essentially in the same role, running health, safety, environment, and sustainability for the company. We started the program, and there's nothing like kind of being in the firing line and you've been there with me for a lot of it, to understand the issues and try to figure out what is the right path and how do we get there. So that's sort of the background. It's pretty diverse, but that's where I come from.
So it leads to an interesting question as you talk about companies and really what is the role of a company? I think many people will be familiar with Milton Friedman, who is a Nobel Prize winning economist, who also, by the way, graduated from Columbia. And about 50 years ago, I think 52 years ago, he wrote a very important essay. And in that essay, he said that there's only one and only one social responsibility for a business, and that is to increase profits. He recognized that there's rules and there's some limitations with respect to not defrauding investors, but his statement at the time, 50 years ago, was very clear that the only corporate social responsibility a company has is to maximize its profits. And I think at the time, 50 years ago, nobody thought that was a unusual or controversial statement, but I don't think many people would agree with that today. I'm curious whether you think that statement still resonates, and when ultimately, philosophically, what is the purpose of a company?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It's a really interesting sort of thought, sort of exercise, and I think you do. For myself, I feel like you do have to juxtapose two different time periods. Because on the one hand, I very much agree that there is something wonderful about capitalism, about the corporate form, that sets clear objectives and has absolutely transparent sort of measuring systems to say whether those objectives are being met. And there's something very clean about that. The reason why I think the time juxtaposition is important is because now I almost feel like Friedman's sort of thesis has, let's say, either been proved true or become moot, because now I think it's sort of undeniable that the profit motivation, maximization of profits or maximization of shareholder value is inextricably tied to a sustainable approach for a number of reasons. Just, you get to the most tactical, and the level of demand for strong ESG performance amongst shareholders, and including particularly institutional shareholders, is at such a peak right now that if you were not to perform in that way, your share price would suffer significantly. So even if you want to sort of be as directly venal as this is what you need to do to maintain your share price. And then when you think about sort of beyond this stock market and get to the real market, the demand from customers who have their own motivations, probably also augmentation of their share price, they are absolutely demanding increased sustainable aspects of products. So we simply would not be selling as much if we were not able to. I can talk a little bit later. Honeywell has a very large stake in sort of the green economy. And then finally, sort of, I think every good CEO is always thinking about, well, what is that society in the future for which we are preparing the company, for which we are directing R&D and structure? And I think that there is a really good premise that future economy is going to be one with significantly lower environmental impact, significantly higher levels of equity. And frankly, if it's not, we may not be here. And even if we could be here, it may not be a place where we would want to be anymore. And so I think, for at least those three reasons, I think there's a strong argument that at this point in time, maximizing shareholder value is inextricably tied to understanding societal value. So
it's almost as if you're saying that the dichotomy, or the supposed dichotomy, between shareholder value and stakeholder value is actually a false dichotomy.
Well, it's become that way, certainly. Yeah.
Interesting. Maybe you could speak a little bit more about Honeywell. I think a lot of people in the audience understand, know who Honeywell is. And I think on paper, we're aware it's over 100,000 employees worldwide, with facilities and manufacturing facilities across the world in a wide variety of areas and technologies. But perhaps you could give a little bit more detail about who Honeywell is.
Sure. And that also is very much tied to our view of sustainability. We are a manufacturing and engineering company. We arguably, or at least our predecessors, were formed back in the 19th century. And so we have been, for more than a century, tied to that sort of core engineering and manufacturing enterprise of the United States, and much more recently of the globe. We've been in a number of different pursuits over the years. At one point, we were the largest, the combined company was the largest chemical company in the world. Currently, we have our largest business is in aerospace. We tend to focus across the board, I have to say, on sort of the more cutting edge technology areas. When an area that we're in becomes more commoditized, we tend to de-accession it, and we're focused we feel like our value really comes from a lot of R&D, a lot of exceptional engineers and scientists, and always kind of pushing the edge on technology. So our largest one is in the aerospace area. We're focused on the cockpit in particular, advanced navigation. We do an awful lot with the space stations, et cetera. So that's our largest business. And then you sort of go down from there. We have it's called Safety and Productivity Solutions. It's one of the largest developers of worker safety equipment, but then also productivity. We mechanize an awful lot of the very large warehouses around the world, which actually has pretty tremendous environmental and safety benefits. We take out a lot of really dangerous work and automate it. And so that's what that business does. And then a buildings systems business, which is HBT, and that is essentially anything that makes a building run. And it's commercial industrial. We really don't do residential. But when you think about, I think it's about 40% of global emissions relate to building envelopes. And when you think about all of the opportunities of making that work better and in a more connected sense, so that it's more efficient, uses less energy, increases comfort, et cetera. So that's what that business does. And then finally, we still do have a specialty chemicals company, and they have been tremendously focused on sustainability products. In fact, they've set up their own separate business called Sustainable Technology Solutions. And they, for example, invented a new type of refrigerant. It's a hydrofluoroolefin, which has a global warming potential orders of magnitude below the former refrigerants. And in fact, we calculate that product alone has already avoided more than 260 million metric tons of CO2e from the atmosphere. And so, it's a chemical company, but again, no commodities. They go in and really kind of go for the jugular in terms of high-tech approaches, and I could talk about some others, but they're just great. And then finally, we have a business which is essentially a software business. It's called Honeywell Connected Enterprise. And their role is to develop software across all of the other four businesses, make their offerings connected, including connected among and between the different businesses. For example, if you're buying a building management system from our HBT, our buildings business, it's really great if you can then connect in the workers through our connected worker systems in our safety and productivity business. So that's, you got these four substantive areas and then one software business to kind of pull them all together. So that's how we're structured. That's Honeywell.
Great, thanks. So let's get into the specifics on the sustainability and what Honeywell is doing. Maybe I think everyone's familiar with Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions, but maybe we could talk first about what Honeywell's doing and has been doing on Scope 1 and 2. Maybe define those for everyone and how you're doing towards achieving your goals.
Sure. Well, when we got here, I and my team, and frankly, really the new CEO at that time, Dave Cote, we came in and, he asked us to start a sustainability program. And what you do with any good sustainability program is you start looking at the data and say, what are the areas where the company currently has the greatest opportunities to reduce impact?
What year was this enterprise?
This was 2004.
Okay.
Which, it's kind of an
early adapter.
Early adopter, absolutely. And, for those who are climate geeks, this was before Kyoto actually came into effect, which was 2005. So, this was early days. But we conducted a materiality or a criticality assessment, and we found that the three things we wanted to really focus on first were climate, worker safety, and our legacy properties. We were founded, more than 100 years ago. As I say, we have a lot of legacy properties, and those were the three things we wanted to address first. And so what we did was we really, again, things have changed a lot, but some still remains the same. The greenhouse gas protocol was already in effect at that time. We set up an inventory based on the greenhouse gas protocol, and we started setting public targets. And they were pretty aggressive. The first one was a 30% reduction absolute, which, just through a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, we went out and started fixing. And then the other thing that I want to just sort of note, because I do think it's critically important, and then also a theme that's made generalizable. I'm very much convinced that in order to reach a sustainable world, we have to look at sustainability not as these initiatives that you're going out to do, but actually as a transformation of the organizational structure of a company. I like to make the analog to the quality revolution in the 20th century, where all of a sudden mass manufacturing said, hey, we need to change the company to produce a different outcome. We're at that point now with sustainability. We need to reconceptualize how work is done, how motivations are set, how incentives are set. What we did in order to accomplish that is, when I first got here, we were instituting a comprehensive lean program throughout the entire company. That was how the company was going to run. And whereas just better to be lucky than good happened to have come just as they were starting this. We agreed that we would incorporate sustainability directly into that. And I do believe that that made all the difference. And I would take me hours to explain how we did it. But basically, the system is based on SQDIC, sustainability, quality, delivery, inventory, and cost. That's how central it is. And so we did build it in. We have done thousands and thousands of projects. We set a series of public goals. The third public goal we set with President Obama in 2015 down in Washington, because he was about to head off to Paris. And we had just finished our second one, and he had asked companies to come down and set goals with him. So we set our third one. We are now, I think, on our fifth one. But the upshot is that we have improved our greenhouse gas intensity by more than 90%. And I think that probably stacks up better than any large industrial company. And it's been a lot of work. If we didn't have the process underlying it, we would never have gotten here. So
Yeah, no, one thing you mentioned that I think is interesting, we'll get to scope 3 in a moment,
sure.
is you talked about some principles of governance. Of course, I think everyone is familiar with the phrase ESG now, which when you started this course that you just described, I don't think ESG as a concept had been defined or not clearly. Of course, the notion of corporate social investing had been. But the G for ESG stands for governance. And clearly one of the principles there is incentives and making sure that there's expertise both on the board and in management. So maybe you could just explain the importance of the G in ESG, because it gets a little bit
no, absolutely. And it does sort of sometimes get short shrift. One of the things, first of all, that I like to think and say is that G is inherent in any strong management system ever, and one of the things also that, again, sort of hearkening back to the quality revolution that Demings really understood was that you can develop a lot of tools to improve operational excellence. But tools are they are no more than that. They are tools. And he understood that the tools were simply a mechanism to change culture. And, there's this really sort of famous Deming statement that it's easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than to think your way into a new way of acting. And to me, what that says is, like, you can come out, stick out a million posters saying, oh, we're green. Okay, whatever. That usually doesn't do anything. What you have to do is have a series of activities that people conduct on a regular basis. And those activities ultimately change culture. And some of the ones relevant to G are that if I feel I need to do something, reduce emissions, improve efficiency, etc., I need to start with looking at the data. I need to then start with, how do I plan and understand the best approach to that? Then how do I monitor it and make sure I'm actually achieving results in a credible way? And ultimately, that's the core of good governance, that I say what I'm going to do, I do it, and I check to make sure I'm doing it so I can constantly improve. And that really is the core. When we talk now, there's so much more emphasis on the governance part with the new SEC draft, with new legislation in the EU. I'm so happy to know that when people come to us for data, the data are very, very solid, because it's really based on that notion that I say what I'm going to do, I do it, and I make sure that there's clear governance that's verifiable. Almost everybody on my team is an engineer. They are almost all Lean or Six Sigma, certified. I happen to be certified as a Lean expert because I thought it was so important. So that it's not just, hey, let's hire one of the big four and get them in here to start auditing the heck out of it. If you don't have that integral culture that says, I'm really going to say what I'm going to do, and I'm going to verify it and, make them credible results, then, you can audit yourself to death, and you won't actually get there other than through fear. And so, so that's a real important one. And you're right when you say about the scopes, that 90% reduction is with respect to scopes 1 and 2. And I'd be happy to talk about our plans for scope 3 and whenever you feel like it.
I want to ask you about scope 3, but one other question just on governance before we leave that is, are you set up with incentives for, so clearly the systems are critical, and I think you explained essentially why any management system any sustainability effort needs to apply a real management system to it. But what about the incentives for compensation for managers and others?
Yeah, and here, that's something we talk a lot about, and I almost feel like I could sound like a broken record. It has to also be part of an integrated system. You can always come out and say, hey, we're going to cut your pay by 50% unless you get X. Well, if you don't have that core system in place, and here's how ours are integrated with the system. First of all, from the beginning, what we did was, as I say, we have 5 essentially businesses. We run pursuant to what's called an annual operating plan system, where every year each business has to set a plan with the CEO, and it's intense. And then we have what's called a longer term planning process. And so they set a plan out 4 or 5 years. What we did early on was we embedded sustainability targets right into our AOP process. So when they go for their
AOP for
the
those?
annual operating plan process.
Okay.
So when our business presidents go to the CEO to get approval of their AOP, there is the sustainability goals built right into that, and he has to approve them. Now, once those are approved, the businesses go out and start achieving them. We track them centrally, and every single quarter, I have to report to directly to the CEO on progress for them. Now, anyone who doesn't meet their goals on sustainability, that gets wrapped up into it's a specified criterion as part of their overall compensation. And so that's how we do it. It's really based, you don't have to say, hey, we're slapping some other, external thing on you. It's built right in and say, you guys are planning for sustainability in your business. And just as if you didn't meet any of your other business goals, at the end of the year, that is going to be taken into compensation.
Well, Evan, we've saved the big splashy news for last, and so I know just last month Honeywell made a huge announcement on Scope 3. So could you maybe just explain what the announcement was? Also, a little bit of just so everyone's on the same page as to what Scope 3 emissions means and what it means for Honeywell and what your ambitions are and how you plan to achieve them.
Certainly. Yeah. So it was pretty splashy news. Just very, very briefly, Scope 1 are the emissions that you emit directly from your facility. Scope 2 are the emissions that are generated indirectly through the energy, the electricity or heat that you purchase. And so that's, sort of things that are really in your control. Scope 3 are emissions up and down the supply chain. It's 15 different categories. And these are things like the emissions that are generated producing the inputs to your company or transporting the inputs to your company or business travel or taking your products from your business to your customer. And then also, very importantly for us, emissions that are generated by your customer when they're using your products. So think about the whole value chain. And they are obviously more difficult. They're harder to measure. They're harder to influence, but it's extremely important that companies start getting an assessment of what are those Scope 3 emissions. You can make significant choices that can reduce them or increase them. And so it's a really important effort.